Will a new GOAT be born in 2026, or are we simply chasing a myth that can never be repeated again? Because when people speak of greatness in football, they don't just mean trophies or statistics or highlight reels. They mean something deeper, something almost spiritual, something that lives in memory long after boots are hung up and stadiums fall silent. And as the world moves closer to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, hosted across 3 nations, watched by more people than any sporting event in history, the question doesn't feel hypothetical anymore. It feels inevitable, because football is entering a moment of transformation unlike anything we've seen before, a moment where the old gods are fading into legend and the new ones are gathering their strength in the shadows, waiting for the stage to be set. And that stage has never been bigger, louder, or more unforgiving than it will be in 2026, where 48 teams, endless matches, global attention, and non-stop pressure will push players beyond their limits, physically, mentally, emotionally, and only one will emerge not just as a champion, but as a symbol, a face, a name that defines an era. Just as Pelé once did when the world was discovering football, just as Maradona did when the game became art, just as Ronaldo Nazario did when power met elegance, and just as Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo did when consistency reached superhuman levels. And now, as those legends step back, the sport finds itself holding its breath, because history tells us something crucial. The GOAT is never chosen. They are revealed, forged in moments of pressure so intense that most players collapse beneath it. And the reason the 2026 World Cup feels different is because it arrives at the exact moment when football's old narrative ends and a new one must begin, when fans are no longer asking who was the greatest, but who will carry the game forward, who will become the reference point for the next generation, who children will imitate on dusty streets and digital screens alike. And the signs are everywhere, because this generation is faster, stronger, more technical, more fearless, raised on analytics and highlights, molded by elite academies, yet still searching for that one defining moment that separates greatness from immortality. And when we talk about candidates, names like Kylian Mbappé naturally rise to the surface, because no player in modern football carries destiny the way he does. Already a World Cup winner, already a global icon, already capable of moments that feel scripted by fate itself. And yet 2026 could be the tournament that either cements him as the heir to Messi and Ronaldo or exposes the limits of hype, because greatness demands not just brilliance but burden, not just speed but leadership, not just goals but moments when everything is on the line and the world is watching. And Mbappé will enter that tournament knowing that history is waiting for him to take it, but knowing also that history is cruel to those who hesitate. And then there is Erling Haaland, a player who feels almost unreal, built like a myth, scoring with a simplicity that borders on inevitability, a striker who doesn't need beauty because efficiency is his art. And while Norway may not be a traditional giant, football has a habit of rewriting its own rules, of lifting unexpected nations through the sheer force of one unstoppable figure. And imagine the story, the narrative power of a player dragging a nation into relevance, of goals raining down, of defenders powerless, of the world realizing that they are witnessing something raw and unstoppable. Because sometimes the GOAT is not the most elegant, but the most feared, and fear has always been a currency in football. But even beyond these obvious stars, the real danger lies in the generation rising quietly. Players like Jude Bellingham, whose maturity defies logic, whose control of games feels unnatural for his age, who doesn't just play football but commands it, who understands tempo, pressure, space, leadership, and responsibility as if born to it. And when you watch him, you don't see potential, you see inevitability. You see a player built for moments that define history. And if England were ever to lift the World Cup again, ending decades of heartbreak, it would almost certainly be through a player like him, someone who embodies the pain of the past and the promise of the future. And then there are others waiting in the wings, names not yet fully written into global mythology, players from South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, each carrying the hunger of nations desperate for heroes. Because the World Cup is more than football. It is identity, it is pride, it is memory. And when a player rises on that stage, they do not represent themselves, they carry millions on their back. And that weight either crushes or forges legends. And what makes 2026 especially dangerous is the format itself. More games, more fatigue, fatigue, more pressure, more opportunities for chaos, meaning the GOAT of the future will not simply be the most talented, but the most resilient, the one who survives the grind, the injuries, the criticism, the social media storms, the tactical battles, and still delivers when it matters most, because modern football is cruel. It does not allow weakness, and the eyes of the world will be merciless, analyzing every touch, every miss, every expression, turning heroes into villains overnight, and only someone with unbreakable mentality will rise above it. And this is why the GOAT debate in 2026 will feel different, because it won't just be about footballing ability, it will be about narrative dominance, cultural impact, leadership, and moments that stop time, moments that live forever in highlight reels and memory, moments like Maradona's run in 1986, Zidane's final in 1998, Ronaldo's redemption in 2002, Messi's tears in 2022, and somewhere in 2026, another moment is waiting to be born, another clip that will be replayed for decades, another image that defines an era, and when that moment arrives, the world will feel it instantly, because football has a strange way of telling us when history is being made. The stadium goes silent, hearts stop, and then eruption, and in that instant, debates end, doubts disappear, and a name is written into eternity. And maybe the most fascinating part of all is that we won't recognize the GOAT while it's happening, not fully, because greatness often reveals itself only in hindsight, years later when we look back and realize we were watching something extraordinary without knowing it. And that is why 2026 is so powerful, because it represents transition, the closing of one legendary chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. And whether the next GOAT is Mbappé, Haaland, Bellingham, or someone we haven't even considered yet, one thing is certain: the World Cup will decide, because it always does, because no stage is greater, no pressure heavier, no reward more eternal, and when the final whistle blows in 2026, when the trophy is lifted, when tears fall and history settles, the world may finally have its answer, not spoken aloud, but understood by millions in the same silent realization that football has moved on, that a new era has begun, and that somewhere in that tournament, under those lights, before those crowds, the next GOAT was born. And yet, even as the world prepares itself for the possibility of witnessing the birth of a new GOAT in 2026, there is another layer to this story that makes it even more compelling, because greatness in football has never been about talent alone. It has always been about timing, destiny, and the invisible battles that happen far away from the cameras, in training grounds, in hotel rooms, in moments of doubt when the noise fades, and only belief remains. And this is where the next GOAT will truly be forged, not in the goals that trend online, but in the resilience to rise after failure, in the courage to take responsibility when everything is on the line, because history remembers not the players who shined when things were easy, but those who stood tall when the weight of the world tried to break them. And in 2026, that weight will be heavier than ever before, because this World Cup will not just be a competition, it will be a global spectacle unlike anything football has ever seen, spread across continents, watched by billions, fueled by social media, AI analysis, instant judgment, and endless comparison to the legends of the past, meaning every step a player takes will be measured against Messi's dribbles, Ronaldo's headers, Pele's goals, Maradona's magic, and that comparison alone is enough to crush most athletes. Yet the next GOAT will thrive in it, will embrace the chaos, will use the pressure as fuel rather than fear, and that is why mentality might end up being the single most important trait in 2026, because the margins at the top are now so thin that physical ability alone is no longer enough. The difference will be decided by decision-making under stress, emotional control in hostile stadiums, and the ability to deliver when fatigue, doubt, and expectation collide. And this is where the legends separate themselves from the merely great, because legends do not ask for the moment, they demand it, they seek it, they own it, and when the game is slipping away, they step forward rather than hide. And the terrifying truth for the rest of the world is that there are players right now preparing for that moment in silence, training with obsession, analyzing their own weaknesses, studying the greats who came before them, visualizing the goal, the pass, the celebration, the image that will define their career. And while fans argue online about stats and trophies, these players are building something deeper, something psychological, something that cannot be taught. And when the dust finally settles, when the stadium lights dim and the echoes of celebration fade into memory, what remains is not just a champion or a trophy, but a legacy that stretches far beyond 90 minutes. Because football, at its core, has never been about a single tournament, but about the stories that live on long after the final whistle. And the 2026 World Cup will be remembered not only for its goals, its drama, or its scale, but for what it represents. The moment football officially stepped into its next era,
the moment the past released its grip and the future took control. And in that transition lies the true meaning of greatness, because every generation believes its heroes are eternal until time gently reminds us that even legends are part of a larger story, a story that must continue, evolve, and renew itself. And that is exactly what 2026 promises to do, as the world watches a new figure rise from the chaos, a player who will not simply inherit the game, but reshape it, redefine it, and carry it forward into a future shaped by speed, intelligence, pressure, and global attention unlike anything before. Because the next GOAT will not just be judged by trophies or records, but by influence, by how the game feels when they are on the pitch, by how defenders panic, how teammates believe, how fans lean forward in anticipation, and how children around the world copy their movements without even realizing why. And this is where legacy truly begins, not in silverware, but in inspiration, in the quiet moments when a kid somewhere decides to pick up a ball because of what they saw in 2026. And that is why this World Cup matters more than any before it, because it exists at the intersection of tradition and transformation, where football's soul meets its future, where analytics meet instinct, where athleticism meets artistry, and where pressure reaches a level no previous generation had to face. And yet within that pressure lies opportunity, because the greatest players in history were not defined by comfort, but by chaos, by moments that demanded courage when fear was the easier choice. And the next GOAT will emerge not because they were flawless, but because they were fearless, because they embraced responsibility when others hesitated, because they delivered when millions held their breath. And that is how legends are truly born, not through perfection, but through presence. And as time passes and debates rage on, as fans argue statistics and rankings and hypothetical matchups, one truth will remain undeniable: that football once again found a way to renew itself, to surprise the world, to remind us why this game captivates billions, because it is unpredictable, emotional, cruel, and beautiful all at once. And long after the goals are forgotten and the trophies gather dust, the memory of 2026 will remain as a turning point, the year the torch was passed, the year a new story began, the year football reminded us that greatness is not owned, it is earned. And when future generations look back and ask when the next era truly began, the answer will be clear, written not in words, but in moments, in silence, in celebration, in history. It began in 2026, when the world watched, held its breath, and witnessed the birth of a new GOAT.